In this last CSR video, we discuss the theoretical background of the concept of corporate responsibility. We can name 4 very important theories which are introducing this topic. First, agency theory. Second, social contract theory. Third, integrated social contract theory. And last but not least, stakeholder theory. The agency theory or principal agency theory is a descriptive ethical theory and tries to explain existing management problems and ethical failures, focusing on prevailing structures. For this scope, the focus lies on the relationship between principals, owners or shareholders, and their agents, managers and administrators. Principals delegate managing tasks to agents, losing their control. This lack of control by the principal may provoke the agents to act for their own profit, rather than in the interest of the principal. Among other things, agents may take more economic and ethical risks in their decisions as they are not ultimately responsible for their decisions. This is called a moral hazard. But how would the principal know this? The agent acting for a principal has more information about the company and the principal less. To overcome such information asymmetry, the principal may pay agents, managers such high salaries that the manager would generally be tempted to act in the interest of the shareholder in order not to lose such an attractive job. This evokes an ethical problem. Firstly, why do managers have to earn so much? Secondly, managers are tempted by such high payments to consider the interests of shareholders much more than those of stakeholders, which can cause some ethical issues with economic consequences. So there is another way out: to hire a trust company. A trust company is overseen by a board of trustees who are trusted with balancing the needs of all stakeholders, not just shareholders, and ensuring that companies live up to their corporate values. In such a company, the vote is not only connected to the number of shares held by the voter, but by the length of time they have held them. The second theory is social contract theory. It assimilates the principal-agent theory, but steps up one level, almost to macro level. Why? Because instead of explaining ethical issues of the company on the meso level between actors of the company, it adapts it to macro level actors, introducing as actors both business and society. It assumes the existence of the contract between business as such and the state that considers rights, responsibilities, and expectation of behavior. A company here plays the role of a citizen who has some liberties but also obligations toward the state. This may remind you of Hobbes and Locke, who perceive the rights of the individual and of the state as an outcome of such a contract. Here, in place of the individual is an organization. For Hobbes and Locke, it is the citizen who delegates some of their rights to the state in exchange for the protection laws etc. Here, it is the company whose existence depends on the ability of the state to protect it, to provide it an access to the employers' capital and natural resources, which is obliged in exchange some of the rights to the state. Without the existence of many public goods such as kindergartens, education system, health system, caring institutions, and many others, the business couldn't attract as many as well-educated, healthy employees. Since the sovereignty of the states rests in people, their rights should be protected and their well-being enhanced. We can't limit this exchange only to businesses paying taxes in exchange for these services. This contract implies that if the existence of business does not enhance the well-being of people and respect their rights, its access to services provided by the society should be limited. In this context, we may ask to what extent the arms industry enhances the well-being of people and their values, or to what extent companies producing some products which may cause heavy damage for the environment, like the large-scale meat industry, especially cheap ones, or private car industries, whose existence causes so many traffic problems, city pollution, and reduction of public transport offers, increasing the exclusion of many in society, or especially short-distance airplane services. Further examples can be obsolescent products, short-lived telephones, cheap fashion clothes with a high turnover, unhealthy food, high in sugar and fat, causing diabetes and obesity, or gambling, or even the sex industry or some financial institutions. These statements are provocative ones and will cause debate. What, beyond creating some places for work, providing some goods and profits for owners, do these companies actually achieve? Do they use the limited natural resources available so that they help us to satisfy our needs, or do they limit them? If we realize that natural resources are limited and that every activity is leaving an ecological footprint, probably we can't make room for all economic activities. Do we prefer in such a case that health, educational, food-providing services remain? Can we manage without some of these other things? Can we permit ourselves as a society to have companies remaining in the market and producing obsolescent goods? Is the right of society and future generations not limited by that? What about luxury goods which are only offered to a very small group within the population and aren't a part of their basic needs, but rather enable so-called conspicuous consumption? Integrative social contract theory was developed by Tom Donaldson, Tom Dunphy, who, while searching for the origin of the norms, focused on the contract. Eventually, they elaborated a social contract methodology for developing moral norms for the business domain. The idea assimilates the one of Hobbes and Locke. You will learn about them in Module 9 and transfer it to the business arena. Whereas Hobbes and Locke wanted to specify general principles for the legitimate exercise of power by the state, ICT theory seeks to distinguish principles for the morality of business activities. Word 4. Imagine that the company is making a contract with another acting in a different country with different norms, like Google in China. The home country and host country may have different norms, either more strict or more lenient standards. How is one to solve the problem? There are many different solutions: Koch's round-table principles, the Global Sylvan principles, the Equator principles, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative principles, the George Integrated Standards, both country and view, balanced with plural ethical standards and human rights as part of the UN Global Compact for Business. One of them is Integrative Social Contracts Theory, ICT. ICTS assumes that all parties involved in the social contract, the contractors, voluntarily consent to whatever the terms of the contract are. What are the characteristics of the parties which participate in the contract, and what is their motivation? ICTS tries to respond to these questions in a general and universal way, a meta way. Since it is almost impossible to obtain an intellectual consensus concerning the adoption of single morality as the framework for global economic ethics, a central problem for ICT is how, in the light of various moral standards, can we achieve some broad agreement and effectively derive guidance from it. ICT assumes the possibility of constructing hypernorms, universal principles which are valid in all places and circumstances. If then conflicts arise between local norms, they can be resolved by subsuming them under these hypernorms. However, the big challenge and criticism toward this theory is to describe these hypernorms and provide examples. ICT offers two different views of hypernorms and their theoretical structure. A principalist view understands hypernorms as the most general universal moral principles that hold moral sway over all microsocial contracts. A contextualist view assumes that hypernorms are not special additional norms but refer to a certain status that the most general norms or principles of each community achieve that are part of a convergence with the norms of other societies. In other words, integrated social contract theory recognized that ethical rules are formally developed for explicit contracts and informally through implicit agreements. These obligations are based on a theoretical macrosocial contract among economic participants, for instance firm and society, which refers to a state macro level. Microsocial contract among members of specific communities, which refers to particular local communities, micro level. The expectations formulated on both levels aren't always congruent. The expectations of specific communities may not always apply to state expectations. This usually causes issues like discrimination of particular minorities that might suffer discrimination within a local group. On the state level, we try to avoid these discriminations. However, the local level also play an important role in integration of the local community. Therefore, the company should pay attention to the particular culture and build a more integrative organizational environment. Stakeholder theory emphasizes the issue that the company is part of a social system similar for all of us. Therefore, an economic activity which harms the values of the society acts in a way similar to the cancer cell in a human body. It ruins the system which nurtures and sustains it in order to achieve its own goals. Survival through multiplication in the case of cancer cells and profit in the case of a company. The idea behind stakeholder theory is that being a part of social system obliges us to respect the rules, values and norms of it. The company may expect, due to such behavior, that customers being part of a society will then prefer it over other companies. However, to stay in our metaphor, sometimes this is not the case. The society, like an organism, the human body doesn't correctly recognize the good cell of the cancer cell, the good organization versus the bad organization, and allows the other to multiply. Sometimes an organization may appear due to ethical certificates as a good cell. However, it may be involved in serious ethical failures such as slavery, child labor, export of weapons to countries using them against democratic values. Similarly, there may be a company without these certificates which is in fact a good cell. Stakeholder theory tries to provide some instruments which allow the company to consider the society's values in its practice. Therefore, it enlarges the perspective of the company, which should not be constrained to maximizing return of shareholders, as some economists like Friedman 1970 maintain, or which some economic systems like neoliberalism demand. Instead, they should be equally concerned about stakeholders. Stakeholders are all parties having a stake in the company, contributing to its success or being affected by its decisions. We include here employees, customers, suppliers, investors, owners, interest groups, community, media, government, society, or even competitors, and last but not least, the natural environment. The necessity to include the natural environment, which provides in the most essential sense natural resources, including location, results from humanity's rising conscience about its role. This is also the case in Catholic social teaching, which started with raising awareness of social problems and now evolves in the direction of greater consideration of nature too.